Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. And as we are about to start, just let me. Yeah, perfect. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. I'm not sure how many time zones we have participants from. So my respective greetings for those time zones. We have a very unique session. We don't have these kind of sessions in this space. The session is titled From Data Silos to Data Sharing, Maximizing the Value of Your Data in Agriculture. And if you're wondering why we are talking about data and data sharing in the context of agriculture, let me give you a quick context. I was in Jharkhand and I was speaking to a small farmer, and the conversation highlighted a few things. Their crop is susceptible to pests. They get low price for the produce. They find it difficult to get financing from the banks for the machinery or any other input. These are not new things, but what is new and what is exciting is that data can help in all of that. Data can address many of the challenges or can be enabler for addressing many of the challenges. And this is the context of today's conversation. Over next 45 to 50 minutes, we have three very experienced panelists who are going to talk about how data can help farmers in making their agriculture more productive, making their income go up, especially for the small holder farmers. So the three panelists I have, let me just quickly introduce one by one. So, and I'm not going in any order, I'm just going by the screen I have. So first I have Anna from Rabobank. She is an innovation manager there, and she has been working on digitization project for the local financial institution, to maximize the impact and scale of Rabobank Foundation. Her work focuses a lot on data-driven and data solutions, and she works very closely with EdTech and FinTech providers. So Anna, welcome to this panel, and we are looking forward for a very engaging discussion. My second panelist wears multiple hats. Welcome Mr. Sanjeev, who is the co-founder of the Agriculture Collaboratory. He wears multiple hats. He is a mentor, angel investor, coach. He is also an independent director at the board of Jetwork, a manufacturing unicorn, a venture partner to Unite Us, but a very extensive stint at ITC where he was chief executive for the agribusiness. So Sanjeev, welcome to the conversation, and we're looking forward to hearing a lot of insight from your past work. My next panelist is Jasmeer. Jasmeer works with IDH. She heads the programs, India programs for IDH. She has been working in this space, and I think she brings very extensive experience of multiple value chains, including cotton, tea, spices, textiles, and over a decade with IDH. So we are going to have a lot of conversations around very nuanced value chain related experiences of IDH that could help us. So these three panelists, are going to give us how data can help agriculture, what is the problem in data sharing, and how we can, unlock the potential and some best practices. So that's the context. For the audience, I think there are multiple platforms where we have participants from. So we have a Q&A that would be there. But meanwhile, if you have a question, you can put in the chat box or any other platform that you are watching. If there might be option for put that. The team is going to collect all these, and then it is going to give it to me, and I will take it to the respective panelist. So with this, I think I'm going to open the conversation and invite my first panelist, Jasmeer, to talk about what is the role of data in your programs and how it enables impact. Jasmeer, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Santosh, and happy to be here today. So for IDH, the kind of programs that we convene, almost all of them touch on what we call certain impact areas. We say better income within IDH, which means more income, stable income, equitable income. And from an environment perspective, we look at working on soil, water, ecosystem approaches, basically landscapes approaches. And now, of course, what everybody is talking about, greenhouse gases, carbon footprints. Data for us is crucial very much across all programs and all program life cycles, right? So right from the beginning, we start with things like baselines and end lines, but what they really help us to do is look at a problem statement holistically. It's not just the agricultural conditions. We look at data for market trends. We look at data to help identify the intensity of potential risks, and so on, so that we can really account for this in how we design our programs with our partners, right? So small examples of why this is important to gather right at the beginning for us was even demonstrated in our own landscapes work in Madhya Pradesh, where we actually had to convene 15 organizations to join this process of designing a program. And that would not have been possible had we not done this mining of different forms of data, secondary, primary, and so on, to build the targets which we all can co-own and agree on. So one master plan meant it had to be evidence-based, and that was only possible because we leaned a lot on data that was thrown up through many different kinds of ways of collection. But the second point was also data is what helped us have the right conversations with some of our private sector partners, with the agri entrepreneurs we work with, in how they service and work with smallholder farmers. So data on the farmer segments, data on the farmer incomes, data on the viability of those services, that is what informed the design. So it was super crucial right at that beginning stage itself. During the program, of course, it comes down to design and monitoring, why we do certain things. And all of that's informed by the sort of information we collect. So for a farmer who's in the program, ultimately they're concerned with income resilience, which is very dependent on the environment. In our climate resilience programs, all the data that was collected by way of soil testing, weather monitoring, crop health assessments, fertilizer use, all of this didn't only lead to that end result of improved yields and reduced input costs. Those are outputs, right? And they show certain results. But the more interesting things were that we could see how that data allowed water budgeting across many villages, right? People deciding how to use the resources. We could help farmers diversify. 2/3 of the farmers in that program across a few villages were able to take up a second crop within the second year, right? Completely gain a second source of income and de-risk themselves by diversifying it. Data from the soil made it very clear that which tree types could be best suited in agroforestry models on watersheds. So all of this made possible based on the data that is, to be collected and was collected. If I look at post, sort of a program, or not even post, but maybe reviewing your program strategy, even at that point, data that we collect during monitoring and evaluation is not only to test, did a program do well, yes or no? It's actually to really look at, does it need to be redefined? If there's a phase 2, how do we decide? For any donor, any funder, financier, I think we will always be faced with those kind of questions. One is our impact accountability, right? That's what we're spending this funding for. But on the other hand, it's also about simply return on investments, which mean economic, social, environmental return of investments, right? Grant funding pools will always be limited. But how do we then invest in the right, sort of areas which have the most potential for impact? That's the kind of stuff we use data for at that end stage. So for us, data is extremely crucial right across the life cycle.
Thanks, Jasmeet. I think this gives some context that why data, we are talking about data. But Sanjeev, you have been, over 4 decades, you have been working in the agriculture and the related sector, and you also help several data-driven technologies and startups. So how do you see the role of data in agriculture has evolved over time, right? From like, you can put the dot together that how we started 4 decades back and how the data is now being used to transform the agriculture. So your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Santosh. Great being here. And thanks, Jasmeet, for that perspective. I know we have worked with IDH before, so I quite appreciate what you people do. But let me at the outset tell you people very clearly that we have a long way to go in this entire journey. All right. And I think I will set the context a bit as to which will perhaps lay out how I think and how I think this thing should pan out. I think the most important aspect is that we have to look at the complete value chain. Okay. And in this value chain that we are trying to address, the farmer is at the center of this data universe. I think we at times tend to forget about it and tend to do things. Because several places we talk about private sector, we talk about startups. For me, there is only one person I'm trying to address, that is the farmer, right? That is at the one end of the chain. At the other end of the chain, I think, is the consumer who ultimately consumes this produce which comes out. We cannot forget these two key actors. All right. So what I'm going to do right now is talk about some of my experiences as I've gone through the last 30, 40 years in IDC. I think the earliest example, if I look at data, the role of data was in e-Chopal. I think that started around in 2000. It was very, very forward looking at that time. And if you look at the entire value chain, it tried to disrupt the value chain from the farmer to the market. That's one value chain where data played a role. Farmer did not have, access to data as to what was happening in the mandis about 2 decades ago. So I think that is the core problem that we try to address there. And so that actually resulted in farmer empowerment, and we delivered value through bundling of information, knowledge, transaction. I think the whole idea is to bring about transparency and trust in this entire. Data has to provide that. And for me, the most important thing is the farmer equation, the profitability equation. You have to either impact the farmer on increasing yield, improving quality, or reducing his cost, right? And also helping him in financing. So this entire data has to help him in this. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for him to perhaps, work in this area. So if I look at information and knowledge is free, that is what, and then we need the farmer and the other to utilize this information. Okay, so the freedom of choice in the transaction has to be left with him. That is one disruption I saw. The next disruption I saw was when remote sensing data was freely available. And we found new startups, new people coming in like Cropin, SatSure, and now I work with another one called Bharat Agri. The idea is that they're being able to use this data and are being able to interpret it and perhaps deliver value. At the end of the day, there is value being given to some part of the entire value chain. So that's an extremely important aspect that we need to keep in mind. Then I'm currently working with another startup called VGrow, right? So, and they work with almost in 760 districts, and they are able to connect the farm produce, that is fruits, to the right consumer. The consumer could be either the customer or the trader, and they're able to use data to be able to connect these two. So, and they're making farmer take pictures of his crop as he goes along, and they offer free agronomy. So these are the ways that I'm seeing how data has evolved in the last few years. Now, I think everyone has a mobile. So some of the things which were almost unheard of in the last few years, about 2 decades ago, are possibly now readily available. But I think ultimately the problems that we have to solve is stagnant yields, soil erosion, climate like Jasmeer talked about, and the government is working on things like agri-stack, etc. But I think the forum where I work in the agri collaboratory, the idea is to get everyone across the world, try to collaborate and see whether we can all make a big difference in this area. Back to you, Santosh.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I think the point you made, that farmer being at the center of this whole thesis, and the evolution of the technology that has enabled a number of solutions that we could not think of earlier. The way the technology is kind of increasing these effectiveness of solutions is mind-boggling. And just to segue into my next speaker, Ravo Foundation has been doing a lot of work in the data-driven innovations. So if you can talk about some of the innovations that you have seen in the data space or the data for agriculture space, that would be great, because that covers the first round of what data can do, how it has evolved, and some of the best practices that you have seen. And then we go into the next round where we discuss that if all of this is happening, why not at the scale that it is needed? So, Anna, over to you.
Thanks so much, Santosh. And yeah, it's great to be here. And thanks also Sanjeev and Jasmer for your insights. I think Sanjeev, you really raised some fantastic points. Also segueing to what I want to say, I think there's also really, as Rabble Foundation, we are active globally, and we really see a lot of these different trends across regions. So of course, India, I think, is really a prime example of how data has evolved, technology has evolved. But in a lot of other regions, I think we are still lagging behind, and maybe segueing also into our work. So a lot of our work still actually is focused on the very primary side of data. So really more on the digitization side, and really both on the formal and informal side. And it can be on all angles, right? So producer organizations or financial institutions, or really on the more informal side, like small saving groups, because we really see that it is still needed. A lot of information is still on paper. And I think what for us is really important, and what we've learned throughout our work, is that we should look at digitization as a journey rather than just data collection or data collection tool or the technologies that go with it. So I think that's also changed a little bit our approach to going about it. And so, for example, one of the obstacles that we hear more and more of hindering the uptake of the technologies and these digital solutions is the lack of trust, the lack of understanding, the lack of value creation, like also Sanjeev mentioned. And I think there it's really the key step before starting anything is to really work with the organizations to try to understand what is the value for them, to try to help them see the benefits of digital transformation, and really help them in this preliminary step before actually moving on to introducing digital technologies like ERP or MIS systems or anything like that. So we really work across those different angles. And I think also on the unlocking digital technologies, we really try to be technology agnostic. I think that's really important for us, because there is an abundance of technology, and we think it's the approach is actually more important than the technology itself in a lot of cases. So we're really trying to refine and help organizations really master that. And I think the last point we also really work on is more on the data management and data collection. So of course, having data collection tool is one thing, but being able to collect high quality data and being able to manage data in a proper way is a completely different one. So I think once you give such tool, or you allow this digitization to happen, you also really need to ensure there is a framework and there is knowledge on how to properly manage the data. And I think once you have these key pillars, actually the fun part starts, and it's more really about unlocking the value creation. So what can we do with this data? It's there, but how do we unlock now the value for smallholders, which is the key thing. And just let me give you a short example of a project, for example, we're working on. It's think of village saving groups, in case someone is not familiar with them. It's really rural, small groups of 20 people or so that come together, save a little bit of money, and then everyone can actually borrow from this pot of money and needs to repay, mostly also even with interest. And effectively, what these groups have managed is really create an informal financial system and have a wealth of information. So they really have all these transactions that are happening, but they're not registered other than on little booklets. So there we really worked with the service provider to firstly, of course, digitize and make sure these transactions are becoming digital. And this would allow members to actually have this digital track record, build up a credit history. And I think what is important to note here is that by itself, of course, digitization or making this digital step can increase maybe a little bit of the efficiency or the accuracy. But the key thing is, or the key hurdle of smallholders is still access to finance, right? So by digitizing, you don't really unlock this value. So there's really more about how can we now use this data to really create, for example, a credit score or create value for smallholders so that it becomes useful and really fulfills the purpose of data.
Thanks. And I think, hearing the different perspective, I think being farmers at the center of this exercise, to using data to create some solutions and using data to kind of solve a plethora of problems ranging from the quality of the soil and the practices that they adopt to giving them a climate resilient way of doing agriculture. I think the next question automatically comes that if data adds so much value, right, why it is not at the scale that it should be? Ideally, it should be at the scale that every farmer, every agency has, been using effectively this data. But it's not only about data being available or data sharing. I think for me, what data ecosystem means is, as Anna, you pointed out, data collection, data management, data sharing, data being inclusive, and data being relevant, right? All of these are part of the data ecosystem. So, if I can put a question to Jasmeer, you have seen these things. What, kind of challenges you see in the data ecosystem? I'm using the word ecosystem to just take the whole thing from data collection to data sharing to data being inclusive, that we need to kind of address so that the use of data could unlock those values that we are talking about.
Great. Yeah, I think there are definitely challenges that we all face, right? And maybe just to start off, probably the most obvious one in that is the fragmentation, right? We have data that's collected by so many stakeholders, starting from civil society who are doing it at project level. We have government agencies who are doing it at their level, within departments, census, this and that. Research institutions, scholars, there is a lot of data that is being collected. Even private sector partners collect data, right? When they're working in agribusiness. But what the challenge here is, that even if these agencies are working together, as we see in many programs, data is still sometimes being collected independently and it's not speaking to each other. It's not shared somewhere in an open source, or even sort of presented in a way that we can actually leverage the fact that so many agencies may be collecting data in the same place about the same farmers, right? And that definitely remains a key challenge. Connected to that, yes, is that limited access and data sharing. So while everyone is collecting, is there sharing? Not a lot of it. It's sometimes concerns definitely around privacy, and people are also not sure around what to be careful about in terms of maintaining privacy. So it's easier not to share anything at all, right? Because people are not so familiar. The second part is always this competition. What is someone else going to do with the data that I set out, right? And will somebody else move forward? And then the last part, which is probably probably the largest reason, is that maybe there aren't enough even mechanisms for the kind of sharing and exchange that we want to do or are capable of doing. But the bottom line is, all these challenges combined definitely inhibit the potential research capability, the potential innovations that can happen at a much larger scale, and even maybe stronger evidence-based interventions, right? Because we can tap into data sets which we don't have the means to do ourselves, and at a scale we don't have. The second part for me is quality and reliability. Even when we set out to do it, there is an intense capacity or a need to create capacity amongst people who are actually creating or collecting that data on the ground, right? So interpretation, how to maintain quality, how to frame things in a certain way when you're speaking with smallholder farmers. These are very finer nuances. But if it's not consistently understood, we then can get inconsistent feedback, right? So the same project, perhaps depending on the quality of people that are implementing, or maybe the application of the technology that we're using, can give us different, sort of results. So capacity building is always a huge need for any kind of data collection, whether you use technology or whether you set out people onto the ground, which you quite often have to do, because that's the third challenge that I do see quite a bit, at least in the global south, is the digital divide, right? Not everywhere do we have still mobile and internet, sort of reaching every nook and corner. And what that means is that there's always going to be a certain level of dependency, again, on people, till technology gets there faster, or a different kind of technology keeping that reality in mind is already put out there, right? So we see some tech companies still using Java, sort of technology, because smartphones and internet connectivity isn't as strong somewhere else. And that's an innovation for today. But what about the future? The last maybe point, Santosh, that I want to, sort of put a little spotlight on is the gender data gap, right? We collect a lot of data for smallholder farmers, and so on. But whether beyond maybe even collecting male and female farmers, are we really understanding the experiences and the contribution of both those segments in the agriculture? Are we understanding the dynamics in what they contribute with? Are we understanding the dynamics and the policies and the innovations and interventions on both men and women farmers, right? Because this is where we also do see a gap. And this often means that the kind of interventions we may be deciding or designing based on that data may not be gender inclusive unless you've really gone to that extra level of depth. So the gender data gap is very real, if not done well.
Thank you, Jasmine. I think some of the points that you made are very, very relevant. And I think if we have to unlock the value of the data, we have to address the challenges. Moving to Sanjeev, the private sector has been very effectively, leveraging data for many of its product and kind of doing innovations on that. From your experiences, do you see any intrinsic challenge the way data is collected, managed, and shared with the private sector that we need to overcome to unlock the kind of value that we see from data being created?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jasper. I think you brought out quite a few relevant issues like fragmentation, etc. But what I will try and do is I'll try and give some examples. Okay. People believe that I worked in IDC, we have lots of data. I think the trick is not the data. The trick is where are we in the maturity continuum of this data? If you ask me, on a scale of 0 to 100, I think most of us are fundamentally struggling with base data. We are at 5 on 100, right? So to me, the larger issues are what sort of data are we looking at? And that's what I work with in this Agri Collaboratory. What data elements are we talking about? Are the data elements even available? If they are available, how are they captured? Are they captured at the point when it occurs, or is someone writing it down and then transmitting? Are they accurate? Jasmine talked about it. Are they reproducible and repeatable? What is the R&R score of those? And most importantly in agri, I think people have to understand that data is not static. That is what people are continuously missing out. Data is not static. Every year it changes. Every year it changes. Every season it changes. Depending on which crop you put, if it's a nitrogen fixing crop, the things change. If there is excessive rain, the soil characteristics can change. Who is capturing that data? So that to me are larger issues, because unless the data is captured, no innovation can happen. And I did a project on wheat, basically whilst in IDC, to basically do what I call a temporal and spatial optimization. We're the second largest buyers of wheat. Obviously, if I'm buying 3,000, 4,000 crores of wheat, if I can make a 0.5%, 1% dent, it makes a difference, right? So idea is when to buy wheat and where to buy wheat. A very simple questions. So you go and look for data. So you go to the government, you ask them from the ag market data. My God, the data could be when you go and do some primary, thing of verification, it could be off by plus minus 20%. And then you spend most of your time, a year even just sorting out data and make sure the data is correct. So unless we sort this out, I find that's a big issue. And let me tell you, there are some of the companies, startups who are solving it. And I want to bring to your mind the example of Vigro. They're making the farmer collect data. Can you imagine the biggest democratization of data will happen when the farmer himself creates the data? So all that the farmer is doing is he's sending this startup the photographs of how the plant is progressing, right? He's getting free agronomy as a return. Free agronomy he gets, and they are able to then make out how the thing is, and they're using high-end computing and algorithms to interpret as to when the crop will ripen, etc. So that I think is, to me, data. How will data be captured? There's just The only other organization who's capable of capturing data is the government. But we need tools. We need tools as to when it will be captured. There cannot be transcription and then being, bait and being passed. To me, those are large issues. We're still very early in the journey, but UPI Aadhaar gives me a nice light at the end of the tunnel that there's a lot of innovation possible at the end of it. Back to you, Santosh.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I think, hearing you and your point on that, we are still kind of far away from what ideal data landscape and data sharing practices could be. I'm just wondering that what could be the value that we can unlock, because whatever examples we have seen with a little bit of data sharing happening and the kind of value it has unlocked, I can just, visualize what could be the impact of the overall, data sharing landscape that can emerge. Just to move to the next segment that I was trying to kind of explore, because we heard about data and what are the challenges we are facing and how inadequate the data. Now, what kind of potential, what kind of potential of data sharing that we see? So that's the, and Sanjeev alluded to that we are very, very early in that journey, right? We're very early. So what could be the, whole potential? What could be the thing? And in order to get to that potential, what could be the key drivers, right? What could be the key drivers? How do you think that, we can deepen and broaden the impact, if I use those, cliche word, of the data on agriculture and food systems, what it can do? So Jasmeer, I think your work with IDH, and you see a number of value chains, a number of interventions in agri and food thing. How do you see the data is going to be a key driver? What it would need to unlock that value? And while you gather your thoughts, I will request the panelists to put questions in the chat box, which I can pick up and put to the right panelists. Yeah, over to you, Jasmeer.
Sure. Great. So I think one definitely most, again, obvious perhaps potential of pooling and sharing data is just that it unlocks a very different level of understanding trends and opportunities and innovations. When we have pooled data in previous, sort of programs that we're working on now, bringing together data from our NGO partners on the ground, using some of, let's say, the government's databases, even then using technology to do, let's say, spatial mapping, giving very different kind of data. Combining those sources has led to a far higher level of insight and looking at patterns and looking at solutions than any one single source could have. Right? We saw this in Madhya Pradesh, where it was a combination of that, even the ground truthing that needs to be done sometimes with what you collect using technology is that little extra that you don't get from simply using any one source. The other part, of course, is we have used data before in programs where this stuff that we are collecting using technology and from the ground in our public-private platforms is what we have used to have those discussions with government at the district levels, block levels, state levels. And it is useful, right? Because it's real-time generation of insight from the ground where maybe the government system cannot do this as fast, given the scale at which they have to operate, or at least they don't today. There is potential to do this, but they see the value of getting that real-time insight, which resonates a lot with what Sanjeev said about data is not static. So if government collects, sort of data which is updated every, sort of once in a couple of years, by pooling sources of data or different stakeholders in that process, you're actually able to get a more real picture from the ground. And who is really at the end of the day benefiting from that? It is again the farmers, right? Because we're using that data to tailor better advisories. We're using that data to tailor better services, to give inputs to the government about what schemes and entitlements are most valued or can even actually support in transitioning to, let's say, climate smart agriculture or regenerative agriculture, which is an aim for both the government and for the farmers to become more resilient. But I think most importantly, it's that collaboration, right? When we put our heads together, the kind of joint research, joint development that different partners have actually put together from their own vantage point, from their own sources, that's been pretty invaluable for us. At a high level, I think these are the most crucial things, right, that we have at least looked at, both in terms of sources, in terms of stakeholder engagement, in terms of keeping that eye on the end, sort of farmer. What do they want and what do they need? How are we using it to leverage? And yeah, I think at one point perhaps is even the market, which we see as the end of a value chain, but it's very much a part of the system. So farmers need to build agency is where we see market information actually being really important from a smallholder farmer perspective. Knowing what to grow, how much to grow, what kind of prices are currently prevailing, what lies behind those prices, right? Is it volumes? Is it quality? This is what gives all the agencies to the smallholder farmers about deciding what do I want to grow, how much, and when do I want to sell it. So for us, these are some of the drivers we see very commonly across our programs.
Yeah. So I think, the key word for me is that in data sharing, collaboration would be a very critical driver. If we don't collaborate, the data sharing would not happen, just to put it very simply. And you have been seeing the role of data sharing, right? So if I have to pick your brain that, how critical is data sharing? I know the data part we have answered, but data sharing, we have the data, but data is not available. There are hesitancy in sharing the data, or there are challenges in that. So, if you can put some thoughts around how critical is data sharing in the context of a smallholder farmers, because that's the kind of goal that we're chasing here. And over to you.
Thanks so much, Santosh. And I definitely want to start with echoing fully what Jasmer said. I think we also really see it. It's really the combination of data that is so much more valuable than just a simple data set that one service provider can collect. And I think the collaboration is also key. When we look at smallholder farmers, I think, like has also been touched upon, there's so many different needs. So they need finance, they need advisory, they need access to markets, they need access to pricing information. They need all these different services. But no single service provider is able to provide all these services at once. And I think that's going also back to what Sanjeev said before. It's all about the profit equation, right? So each service provider is specialized in the services they provide. So a financial institution is really good at providing a loan, but has no clue on how to, for example, advise farmers on when to sow or harvest. So you really need to combine these different service providers. We really need these collaboration. We need to combine the different data sets to, first of all, make it also more cost effective, more efficient. We cannot have 5 agents or 5 smallholder farmers walking their fields, collecting their field boundaries for different purposes. That is not possible at all. I think agriculture by itself is difficult, but looking at the small margins with smallholder farmers, we really need to streamline these processes. And I really do believe that data sharing is the only way to do this. So both from the service provider perspective to really create business models for them and make them sustainable, but also for smallholder farmers to really allow them to benefit from a range of different services. Because one service by itself cannot really tackle all their issues and has limited value. So if a farmer gets finance but no advisory and doesn't know how to deal with the climatic conditions, the value is very limited. And similarly, if they have access to advisory but cannot get anywhere the inputs, then again, the value is limited. So it's really all about the collaboration and data sharing from these different service providers to really unlock these services and enable basically this integration and bundling of services.
Thanks. And I think this obviously gives me a question that, Sanjeev, if we have to really use the data sharing to unlock the value for the farmers as well for the private sector, how do you see that we can achieve that? Because the data sharing has to create value for both the farmers, smallholder farmers, as well as private sector. Any insight on this, that how we can make this happen? Because unless and until we see a value being created for both, we are not going to see this happen, right? So your thoughts on this?
I agree with you. So I have some weird and thoughts, and I will let my imagination run a bit wild, because this is a real problem to solve. As of today, there is hoarding of data. The government also hoards. Everyone hoards data. No one is willing to share. And you get data with a lot of difficulty. And when you get the data, you don't even are clear whether it is completely accurate. Okay, so that is the problem that I have talked of. And then I heard someone say very correctly that every authority, every set of people are trying to make their own roads but no one is making the highway, right? Only if there's a highway will everyone ride on it. But I think the government is doing a terrific job in building the agri stack. But if you look at the agri stack, it is looking at only three parts. It will tell you about the farmer, his plot, and what crop. That's all. So agri stack is not going to solve all problems for you. You will need everyone to, so like Jasmeer talked about the number of institutions in India which have the data, all that data has to come in. So if I let my imagination run a bit wild and I look at the large language models and the AI part, can you imagine in agri, I build a LLM for India or for the world, where all data comes in and then the questions could be asked. To me, that is how my imagination is running, that, and you come in, but if you're using my data, which I have created uniquely, I should get paid for it. So there's a value for everyone who's creating data. So all those things will need to be worked out. But I think both Rabobank and IDH are here. So I need to perhaps, tell them that, first of all, when you talk about agri income, etc., you have to look at the full village as an ecosystem. And when we evaluate data, we find if the earning is 100, only 35 comes out of agri. Another 35, 40 comes from employment, right? So I think we need to understand the full ecosystem. So my imagination says that we should run 5 or 10 centers of excellence, farms or villages where we'll ring fence and see what data comes in, what data goes out, try and perfect that. We're trying to solve for India without solving for a village. I think this is what I call creating centers of excellence. If we do that, we'll understand the importance of data, then innovation will happen. First of all, we'll decide what elements of data will come through, how will we even capture them, right? And then my mind suddenly rushes to Nitin Gadkari and how he's taking the National Highway Authority. So I want another Nitin Gadkari to run the National Agri Authority, who will then say, I'm going to multiply, do 10 villages a day, 20 villages a day, so that I can cover 650,000 villages of India. I need someone to drive that once we create this center of excellence for India.
So Sanjeev, I have to cut you, but I think I get the idea. A data sandboxing exercise that gives us all the value that data can unlock, and then we scale it up, right? So moving quickly, you have been a key supporter of this event, and Rabo Foundation has been very generous with this initiative. You see what kind of discussion happening here, and if I just have to take the fancy wish of Sanjeev, which is very, very real, if we can put it together, what do you think that these kind of events could focus on? What is the kind of value that we can unlock? If we can quickly, what is your expectation for such kind of gatherings? What we can deliver as a collaborator of this space that could be meeting Rabo Foundation's goals? So quickly, because we are running out of time and I want to pick up a couple of questions. So, Anna, over to you.
Thanks so much, Santosh. And I'll try to make it very quick. I think, well, a lot of the challenges were already addressed. So I really see this event also as a start kind of to breaking the silos, building the highway, like Sanjeev said. I think the topics of the data ecosystem, data sharing, data standards, data governance are not very sexy topics, if I can call it like that. We have blockchain, we have artificial intelligence, remote sensing, all kinds of topics we want to work on. But I think we really often forget the essential element of unlocking these types of services is really more on building a proper data ecosystem. So I really think of this event as a way to really generate awareness around this topic, learn from each other. I think we have really some fantastic speakers today that we can learn something from on their journey, how they've approached it. And I do encourage an open dialogue to really achieve this data sharing in the long run and try to break these barriers that are stopping us now. And I think as a last point, I really think it's a call to action. Now there's so much theory, so much talk, so much ideas, but nothing is really happening. No one is, or very few of us are sharing data. So also we as Rabo Foundation, the next couple of months, we're really going to take to try to see, okay, how can we make something tangible out of it? How can we turn this into reality and try to share some real data and create some real use cases. And I hope that more of you can be inspired today to do the same.
Anna, thank you very much. I think if we could just create not an India stack or agri stack, but agriculture impact stack and see that it's not about data, it's getting all the people together, then we can work on that. I have a few questions which are quick. I think there's one question that in the context of data collection for farmers, how do the participant feel about compensation to the farmer for the use of their data? I think Sanjeev and everybody agreed that if you are using farmers' data, the benefit has to be shared. So I think I can say on behalf of the panel that that's a very valid ask, that the data sharing should be mutually beneficiary. Tanvi is asking that how do you address the discrepancies in the data collected by different agencies? A quick response: multiple agencies collecting the same data, coming up with a different kind of numbers. How do you deal with discrepancies? How do we aggregate data and make it align? Anyone with any idea?
Maybe quick ones. I had the same thing in my mind, so that's a very good question. But I guess maybe you have a benchmarking of at least some methods for each of the many ways in which you can create data, right? So primary data is what kind of technology. You can't cover it all exhaustively, but maybe guidelines and maybe a basket can help.
Yeah, maybe the government needs to create certain standards so that we can, comply with the standards. But ultimately, we'll have to use technology to perhaps capture data so that there is only one truth and single truth. That's it.
So we can say that we need a data conciliation framework where multiple data sources can be reconciled to give one dimension, right? What strategy and mechanism can be employed to effectively unite diverse stakeholders in the agriculture sector for the purpose of sharing collective learning from agriculture data? I think the point I was making, that making an agriculture impact stack rather than saying agriculture stack or India stack, we could think of that data needs people, needs institutions, need use cases to all come together. Only then we can see that. So I think that's a point. Some of the other questions, I think the panel has already kind of discussed and given the responses. I'm not going to that. Okay, key challenges in data sharing, I think privacy and other things we have discussed. So I think, considering the paucity of time, I could have had more elaborate responses, but I am going to kind of quickly summarize. And this has been a very, very engaging discussion, and we got lots of insight. But if I have to summarize these things, one, there is no doubt about what data can unlock to smallholder farmers. It can increase their yield, it can reduce the vulnerability, it can give access to the financing instrument, it can give access to so many things. So that, no question about that. Second, data, if it has to be realized, data sharing and data collaboration and the relevancy and diversity of the data has to be established. We have to bring diverse sources, diverse use cases, diverse players to come together to solve the data paucity. Third, it has to be a concentrated approach. It cannot be done by 5 people chasing 5 different goals. We have one goal: smallholder farmers should benefit from this data-enabled solutions. And for that, all the stakeholders who are working with the smallholder farmers as a goal, they should come together and work on the things. I think these are the key takeaway. The last point, the action item for us would be that I still believe that this kind of discourses should be more frequent, and more commitment and more collaboration need to happen in this space so that we move away from the discussing to have some action points. So Anna, Sanjeev, IDH, Jasmeer, you all have been working in different capacity. So we need to think of how we can get some initiative starting from this and meeting the goal that we just discussed. So with this, a very, very big thank you for all the panelists. Thank you very much for making time and being crisp and precise to this topic. The audience to being very, very patient and very engaging. I can see the chat box. So thank you very much. I think there are multiple sessions across the day, and then you'll see things. Please do participate, and we look forward to engaging with you on what we can do with data to unlock the value for smallholder farmers over the next few sessions, as well as in our programs. Thank you very much. Over to Ajay and the team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmeer. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Santosh.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can close the session.
Yeah, we can close it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Sanjeev. Thanks, Santosh.